My family believes power is measured by the thickness of a gold-plated business card. To them, I am just the dusty smell of old books. A lowly librarian they mock behind my back, but as my sister raises her champagne to celebrate the club membership she groveled 5 years to get, she does not know my cheap coat pocket is vibrating with a ping from the Royal Guard. She is just a new member. I am the reason the Royals are here today. My name is Noelle Harrow, and if you asked my mother, she would tell you that my greatest ambition in life is to organize the decimal system in a dusty municipal library basement. She would be wrong, of course, but correcting her has never been worth the expenditure of oxygen. Currently, I was sitting at what was arguably the most coveted table at the Azure Coast, the crown jewel restaurant of the Silver Point Golf and Yacht Club. The establishment sat perched on a cliffside, like a white marble predator overlooking the ocean, smelling of sea salt, old money, and the desperate, cloying perfume of new money trying to blend in. To my right, the Pacific Ocean glittered under the midday sun, a vast expanse of blue that cost $50,000 a year just to look at from this specific vantage point. To my left, my sister Bianca was engaged in a love affair with a piece of plastic. It was a credit card-sized rectangle, heavy and cold, shimmering with a matte platinum finish. The words "Platinum Legacy Member" were embossed in gold leaf across the front. Bianca, 34 years old, and dressed in a floral designer dress that screamed for attention a little too loudly, had propped the card up against the crystal salt shaker. She looked at it with more tenderness than I had ever seen her look at her own children. "I still cannot believe it," Bianca sighed, her voice trembling with a mixture of ecstasy and relief. She reached out, her manicured fingers hovering over the card, as if touching it might make it vanish like a mirage. "We are actually here. We are actually in." Across from her, my brother-in-law, Preston, leaned back in his chair, expanding his chest so the fabric of his Italian suit strained against his ribs. He was a man who took up space aggressively, a commercial real estate developer whose entire personality was built on leverage and loud handshakes. He signaled the waiter for another bottle of champagne, not bothering to make eye contact with the staff member. "It is not about belief, babe. It is about execution," Preston said, his voice booming enough that the table 3 distinct sections away could hear him. "You know, the membership committee told me the wait list for the legacy tier was 8 years long. 8 years. Most people just accept that. They put their name down and they wait until they are gray. But you know me, I do not wait." My father, Arthur Harrow, nodded sagely, slicing into a piece of prime rib that cost more than a mid-sized car payment. "That is what separates the men from the boys. Preston, tenacity. You have to grab the bull by the horns." "I just made a few calls," Preston said, waving a hand dismissively, though his eyes were begging for more praise. I knew the chairman of the board was looking to offload that distressed commercial property in the warehouse district. I facilitated a quick sale. No commission, just a friendly handshake. 2 days later, my phone rings, and suddenly, that 8-year wait list vanished, just like magic. "It is not magic, Preston, it is brilliance." My mother, Ilara, chimed in. She beamed at him, then turned her adoration back to Bianca. "You two have finally done it. This is it. This is the inner circle. The Harrows are finally where we belong." I took a small, calculated sip of my water. I was the only one at the table not drinking the bottomless mimosas that had been flowing since 11 in the morning. The table was a grotesque display of gluttony disguised as refinement. A silver tower of seafood sat in the center, weeping condensation onto the white tablecloth. There were oysters flown in from cold northern waters, lobster tails the size of forearms, and a tin of caviar that I knew retailed for $300 an ounce. They were eating it like it was popcorn. "Noelle, you haven't touched your lobster," my mother said, her voice dropping an octave, shifting from pride to a tone of weary disappointment. She looked at me, taking in my appearance. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, tailored but understated, with a cream silk blouse underneath. No jewelry except for a simple watch. To my family, I looked like background noise. I looked like the person you hired to do your taxes or, as they preferred to believe, the person who stamped return dates on library books. They saw bland. They did not know that the silk of my blouse was a rare blend produced in a single village in Vietnam, or that the simple watch on my wrist contained a microtransmitter capable of encrypting voice data to a satellite network. "I am not very hungry, Mother," I said softly. "Of course she is not." Bianca laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. She swirled her champagne flute. "Noelle's stomach is probably used to vending machine sandwiches and instant coffee. Rich food probably upsets her system." Preston chuckled, slurping an oyster noisily. "You need to broaden your horizons. Noelle, get out of that dusty library of yours. You know, with this membership, we get 6 guest passes a year. Maybe, if you are nice to your sister, she will let you come sit by the pool one day. You can bring a book." "That is what you do, right? Read books?" "I manage archives," I corrected, my voice level. It was the same correction I had made 1,000 times, and it was ignored for the 1,000th time. "Same thing," Preston said, dismissing my career with a wave of his oyster fork. "Paper is paper. Money is real estate. That is the lesson." The conversation inevitably pivoted back to the only thing that mattered to Bianca: the club. Now that she had the card, the hunger had not abated. It had simply shifted targets. Getting in was step 1. Being seen was step 2. "The Autumn Equinox Gala," Bianca whispered the words like a prayer. "It is in 2 weeks. The concierge told me it is going to be the biggest event the club has hosted in 10 years. "I heard the tickets start at $5,000 a plate," my father said, whistling low. "Money is not the issue, Dad," Bianca said, leaning in, her eyes wide and intense. "It is the guest list. You have to be invited to buy a ticket. They are capping the attendance at 200 people for the grand ballroom. Everyone else has to watch the speeches from the overflow patio on screens. Can you imagine the humiliation? Being at the club but watching on a TV screen like a servant?" "We will get into the ballroom," Preston declared, though I noticed a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. "I am working on it." "You have to, Preston," Bianca insisted, her grip on the platinum card tightening until her knuckles turned white. "You have to. Do you know the rumors? They say a high-level diplomatic delegation from Europe is coming, maybe even royalty, actual royalty. Imagine the networking. Preston, if we get a photo with a royal, my God, it would put your firm on the international map. And Mom, think of the society pages." "Royalty here?" my mother gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so cliché it almost felt scripted. "At Silver Point?" "It is extremely exclusive," Bianca said. "They say the security is going to be tighter than the Pentagon. That is why everyone is fighting for a table. If you are in that room, you are certified elite. If you are not well, you are nobody." I looked down at my watch. It was 12:45 in the afternoon. "Do you have somewhere to be, Noelle?" Bianca asked, catching my glance. Her tone was sharp. She hated when attention drifted away from her, even for a second. "Is the library opening late on a Sunday?" "Just checking the time," I said, looking back up. My face was a mask of polite disinterest. "I have a schedule to keep." "Always a schedule," Preston sneered. "Relax, Noelle. Live a little. You act like you are running a country, not a card catalog." I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply watched them. They were so loud, so colorful, so desperate to prove they existed. Bianca was practically vibrating with the need to be validated by this building, by this food, by the people around us. She wanted to rub elbows with royalty to prove she wasn't just a girl from the suburbs who married a loudmouth real estate agent. They had no idea. I looked at the Platinum Legacy card again. It was a nice piece of plastic. It probably cost $10 to manufacture. "The Autumn Equinox Gala," I repeated slowly, testing the words. "Yes, the gala," Bianca snapped. "Don't worry, Noelle, even if we get a table, I doubt we can squeeze you in. It is black tie. I do not think you even own a gown that isn't beige. I am sure I will be busy that night anyway, I said, reaching for my water glass. Doing what? Dusting? Bianca laughed, looking to our parents for approval. They chuckled along, a harmonious chorus of condescension. I checked my watch again. 12:46. The timing had to be precise. In my line of work, my actual line of work, not the fantasy they constructed for me, precision was the difference between a successful extraction and a diplomatic incident. I wasn't checking the time because I was bored. Though their conversation was agonizingly dull, I was checking because the protocol dictated a specific sequence of events. You know, Preston said, wiping butter from his chin, I heard a rumor that the royal delegation is actually looking for investment opportunities in American tech. If I could just get 5 minutes with their attaché. You need to get us in the room first. Preston, Bianca hissed. I saw the Potters yesterday. They said they already secured a table near the front. If that witch Sarah Potter gets a table and I am stuck on the patio, I will die. I will literally die. Relax, I am on it, Preston said. But he pulled out his phone and started scrolling nervously under the table. I sat back, feeling the weight of the phone in my own jacket pocket. It was a burner model, strictly for this operation, but it was currently linked to a secure server in London. I didn't need to look at it to know what was happening. I could feel the vibration. One short buzz, the chess pieces were moving. This crab is divine, my mother said, oblivious to the tension radiating from her son-in-law. Noelle, you really should try some. It is such a waste to pay for a buffet and have you eat nothing. I am saving my appetite, I said. For what? Microwave dinner for one? Bianca smirked. Something like that, I replied. The waiter arrived to refill the mimosas. He was young, tired, and clearly hated Preston, who had snapped his fingers at him twice already, as he poured the cheap sparkling wine mixed with orange juice into Bianca's glass. I saw his eyes flick toward me. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second. But I caught it. A slight nod, barely a twitch of the chin. Asset in place. My family continued their feast of vanity. They talked about the new Mercedes Preston was leasing. They talked about the private school they were trying to bribe their way into for Bianca's twins. They talked about the class of people at the club and how refreshing it was to be away from the riffraff. I sat in my beige suit. The librarian, the failure, the bland stain on the Harrow family portrait. I listened to the wind rattling the rigging of the million-dollar yachts outside. I listened to Bianca's shrill laughter, and I waited, because in about 3 minutes, the reality they thought they owned was going to collide violently with the reality I controlled. Bianca thought she was celebrating a victory. She didn't know she was eating her last meal before the execution of her social status. To the Harrows, my father toasted, raising his glass high. To the top of the food chain. To the top, Preston echoed. To us, Bianca beamed. I raised my water glass, the condensation cool against my fingertips. To the truth, I whispered, so softly that none of them heard me. I took a sip. The water was cold, clean, and sharp. It tasted like anticipation. The silence that followed my toast to the truth was brief, swallowed almost instantly by the clatter of silverware and the ambient noise of the restaurant. My mother, Ilara, dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, her eyes shifting to me with a look I knew all too well. It was the look one gives to a stray dog that has managed to survive the winter, a mixture of pity and mild revulsion. So, Noelle, she began, her voice dropping into that specific register of maternal concern that always felt less like affection and more like a medical diagnosis. How is the work going? Are you still fixing those old books? She said fixing, the way one might say shoveling manure, to the Harrows. My career was a quaint, dusty little hobby that I had stubbornly dragged into my 30s, in their minds. I spent my days in a cardigan, smelling of mildew, carefully taping torn pages of Moby Dick back together in the back room of a municipal library or a failing antique shop. They imagined me surrounded by silence and poverty, fighting a losing battle against the digital age. It is going well, Mother, I replied, slicing a small piece of cucumber. We have been very busy lately. Busy with what? Bianca interjected, not looking up from her phone where she was likely posting a photo of her membership card. Did a school donate a box of encyclopedias from 1990? My father chuckled, a low rumble of amusement. Now, Bianca, be nice. Someone has to preserve the past, even if it is not exactly lucrative. They had absolutely no idea. The reality of my life was so far removed from their imagination that it would have sounded like science fiction to them. I was the chief executive officer of Aegis Archives, a private conglomerate that operated in the shadows of the global stage. We did not tape books. We specialized in high-level forensic restoration and data security for sovereign nations. When a government server crashed and threatened to erase a decade of tax records, they called us. When an archaeological dig in Egypt uncovered a papyrus scroll that would crumble if exposed to oxygen, they called us. When the Vatican needed their entire secret archive digitized and encrypted against quantum hacking, they hired Aegis. I managed a team of 300 cryptographers, historians, chemists, and security experts. My shop was a 12-story glass fortress in Zurich, with a satellite office in Dagsee, but to my family, I was just Noelle the librarian. It is a bit more complex than encyclopedias, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We are currently handling a preservation project for a client in Europe. It involves some significant historical assets. That sounds nice. Dear, my mother said, her eyes already glazing over. She reached across the table to straighten Preston's collar. But you know, Noelle, we worry about you. This job is fine for now, I suppose. But what about the future? You cannot live on a librarian's wage forever. Look at Bianca. She has built a life. I have a life, Mother. You have a studio apartment and a cat, Bianca sneered, finally looking up. And let's be honest, Noelle, you are 31. In our world, that is basically twilight. You need to find a husband, a man with actual assets. You cannot rely on gluing paper together to fund your retirement. Who is going to pay for your nursing home? The public library system? I took a slow breath. The urge to correct them was a physical ache in my chest, but I had learned long ago that the truth was a language they did not speak. I remembered a dinner 3 years ago, right after I had returned from Rome. I had just closed the contract with the Holy See, a deal worth $70 million over 5 years. I was vibrating with the adrenaline of it, desperate to share my success. I had started to tell them. I had said, Dad, Mom, I just secured a contract to digitize the Vatican Library. It is huge. We are using new laser scanning technology that... But before I could finish the sentence, my father had cut me off. He had turned to Preston and asked, So, Preston, what do you think about the resale value on the new Land Rover? I am thinking of trading in the sedan. And just like that, the Vatican was gone, replaced by the depreciation curve of a luxury SUV. Another time, I tried to mention my trip to Copenhagen. I had been personally summoned by the Danish royal court to oversee the restoration of a velvet cushion that had held the crown jewels for 200 years. It was a delicate, high-pressure operation involving armed guards and chemically controlled environments. I held a crown today, I had said at Thanksgiving. That is nice, Bianca had replied, examining her fingernails. Speaking of crowns, did you see the tiara that actress wore to the Met Gala? Preston promised to buy me a replica for my birthday. They did not want to know. They preferred the version of Noelle that made them feel superior. If I was successful, if I was powerful, then their entire hierarchy would collapse. They needed me to be the failure so they could be the success. I am doing just fine, Bianca, I said, keeping my tone light. My retirement is taken care of. Preston snorted, wiping grease from his lip. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table in a power pose he had likely learned from a YouTube seminar. Noelle, look, I know you pride yourself on being independent, but let's talk real numbers. Inflation is hovering around 4%. If you have your money in a savings account, you are literally lighting it on fire. You are losing purchasing power every single second you sit there. I am aware of how inflation works. Preston. Are you? He raised an eyebrow, a gesture of patronizing skepticism. Because people in your tax bracket usually don't. Look, I can help you. I have a new fund opening up. Minimum buy-in is normally $50,000. But for family, I can squeeze you in for $5,000. It is aggressive, high-yield commercial debt. I can probably get you an 8% return. That is enough to maybe upgrade your car. What are you driving now? That Honda? It was an Audi RS7, bulletproofed and modified for evasive driving, but I parked it 3 blocks away whenever I visited them. I usually walked or took a cab to their house to maintain the illusion. I appreciate the offer, Preston, I said. But my finances are stable. I have a portfolio. A portfolio? Bianca laughed, covering her mouth. What is in it? Government bonds and cat food coupons? Something like that, I said. My father sighed, a heavy, tragic sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He looked from Bianca, glowing in her expensive dress and platinum membership, to me, in my boring suit. I just want you to be secure. Noelle, he said, shaking his head. I look at Bianca, and I see drive. I see ambition. She wanted this life, and she went out and grabbed it. She married well. She positions herself socially. She is a hero. You somewhere along the way, you lost that fire. You settled, and it breaks my heart to see you settle for mediocrity. It is the greatest disappointment of my life to see your potential wasted on books. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mediocrity, disappointment, wasted. Once, those words would have made me cry. Once, I would have begged for his approval. Showed him my bank statements. Showed him the magazine articles where my name was mentioned as a pioneer in data archaeology. But today, the words just bounced off me. They were describing a stranger. They were mourning a ghost. Suddenly, the phone in my jacket pocket vibrated. It was not the short buzz of a text message, but a long, pulsing rhythm, a priority 1 alert. I pulled the phone out, keeping it below the table edge. It was a sleek black device with no brand markings. I placed my thumb on the screen, and the biometric scanner flashed green. An encrypted email opened, the text scrolling rapidly across the dark screen. Sender: Royal Household Security Detail / Alpha Team Leader. Subject: Package delivery confirmed. Message: The Eagle has landed. Delegation is en route to Silver Point. ETA 10 minutes. Diplomatic pouch with asset Blue Star is in possession of the courier. Proceed to extraction point. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. The Blue Star was the code name for the document I had spent the last 6 months retrieving from the black market. A stolen constitution that threatened to destabilize the entire monarchy of Avalonia if it remained lost. And the Eagle was the Duke himself. Who is texting you? Bianca asked sharply. Is it the library asking you to cover a shift? Just a notification, I said, sliding the phone back into my pocket. Nothing you need to worry about. Well, put it away, my mother scolded gently. We are celebrating. Try to be present. The waiter returned with the bill. It came in a black leather folder, placed discreetly in the center of the table. Preston grabbed it with a flourish, opening it and scanning the total. He didn't flinch, though I knew the number at the bottom was likely close to $1,000. Put it on the card, he said loudly, tapping the Platinum Legacy card against the table. And add a 20% tip. We take care of the service staff here. He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing with a sudden thought. You know what? Preston said, his voice dripping with magnanimity. Don't worry about your share. Noelle, we got this. I can pay for my own meal, I said automatically. Don't be silly, Bianca chimed in, patting my hand. Her palm was clammy. We know things are tight for you. Consider it a gift, a little charity from us to you. Maybe you can use the money you saved to buy a new blouse, something that isn't so gray. We insist, my father added. Let Preston pay. He can afford it. You just say thank you. The table went silent, waiting for my gratitude. They wanted me to bow my head. They wanted me to acknowledge that without them, I could not afford to sit in this chair, eat this food, or breathe this air. They wanted to buy my dignity for the price of a lobster tail and a glass of water. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the fear behind Preston's bluster, the insecurity behind Bianca's cruelty, and the blindness of my parents. They were drowning in debt and desperation to maintain an image, while I sat on an empire they refused to see. "Thank you," I said. The words tasted like ash, but I forced them out. "That is very generous of you. You are welcome," Bianca said, smiling like a queen bestowing a favor on a peasant. "That is what family is for. We lift each other up." I checked my watch. 1 o'clock. "Actually," I said, pushing my chair back, "if you will excuse me for a moment, I need to use the restroom." "Make it quick," Preston said, handing the card to the waiter. "We want to go tour the ballroom before the crowds get there. I want to show the event coordinator exactly where our table should be for the gala." "I will be right back," I lied. I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit. I walked away from the table, away from the pity and the insults and the suffocating weight of their expectations. I walked through the crowded dining room, past the tables of wealthy patrons who looked right through me. I did not go to the restroom. Instead, I turned left toward the grand foyer, where the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the circular driveway. The timing was perfect. As I reached the glass, I saw the lead escort vehicle turn into the long driveway of the Silver Point Club. It was a black Range Rover with diplomatic plates, followed closely by a Rolls-Royce Phantom flying the royal standard of Avalonia. The librarian was about to clock out. The CEO was about to clock in. And my family was about to learn that the most expensive thing in this room wasn't the caviar or the membership card. It was me. I slid back into my chair, the plush velvet cool against my back, just as the atmosphere in the Azure Coast shifted from self-congratulatory indulgence to palpable, suffocating panic. It was a subtle change at first, like the drop in barometric pressure before a hurricane, but within moments, the air was thick with the scent of desperation. The relaxed clinking of silverware had been replaced by the frantic tapping of smartphone screens and the hushed, urgent whispers of people realizing they were about to be left behind. The topic of conversation had snapped back to the autumn equinox gala with the violence of a rubber band. "Refresh it again, Preston," Bianca hissed, her voice tight and high. She was gripping her phone so hard her knuckles were white, the platinum legacy card forgotten on the tablecloth beside a smear of butter. "It has been 20 minutes since the portal opened. The email should be here." Preston was already sweating. A thin sheen of perspiration glistened on his upper lip as he furiously thumbed through his inbox. "I am refreshing, babe. I am refreshing every 3 seconds. The server might be overloaded. Everyone in the tri-state area is trying to log in right now." "We are members," Bianca said, her eyes darting around the room to see if other tables were celebrating. "We have priority." The concierge said legacy members get first-tier access. If I do not get that confirmation code in the next 5 minutes, I am going to scream. The hierarchy of the Silver Point Autumn Gala was brutal and explicit. It was not enough to simply attend. Mere attendance was for the common millionaires, the people who owned a few car dealerships or a small chain of dental practices. The real power lay in geography. There were 2 zones. The Grand Ballroom, which seated exactly 50 families, was the inner sanctum. It was where the speeches happened, where the vintage wines were uncorked, and where the press photographers were allowed to roam. Then there was the overflow area, the patio, and the secondary lounge, where the remaining 300 guests would be corralled to watch the proceedings on large high-definition screens, eating a downgraded menu and pretending they were having a good time. To sit in the overflow was a social death sentence. It was a public declaration that you were wealthy enough to buy a ticket, but not important enough to matter. "I am calling Gerald," Preston announced. Abandoning his phone screen for a direct line, he held the device to his ear, his face contorted into a mask of forced casualness. Gerald knows the seating chart manager. He owes me a favor from that zoning permit issue last year. We watched him in silence. My mother was wringing her hands, looking at Bianca with terrified sympathy. My father was frowning at his unfinished steak. I just watched, the secret knowledge of the approaching motorcade sitting warm in my chest. "Hey, Gerald, my man!" Preston boomed into the phone, his voice too loud, too eager. "Look, I am just checking on the allocation for the gala. Yeah, I know it is tight, but listen, Bianca and we just got the legacy status. We are expecting table 6 or 7. What? What do you mean, fully committed?" Bianca stopped breathing. She stared at Preston, her eyes widening in horror. No, listen to me." Preston's voice dropped, losing its bluster. He turned away from the table, hunching his shoulders as if to physically shield us from the bad news. "Gerald, come on. It is Preston. We are talking about the ballroom. I cannot sit on the patio. I have clients coming. Hello? Gerald?" Preston pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it. He had been hung up on. "Well?" Bianca demanded. "What did he say?" "He said the list is locked," Preston muttered, not meeting her eyes. "He said the committee finalized the 50 families this morning. There is no space. We are waitlisted for the ballroom. We are confirmed for the patio." "The patio?" Bianca shrieked. Heads turned at the nearby tables. But she didn't care. "The patio is for tourists. It is for the people who buy day passes. I did not spend 5 years sucking up to the board of directors to watch a television screen outside in the humidity." "I can fix it," Preston said, though he sounded like a man trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. "I will call the vice president. I will offer a sponsorship. I will sponsor the floral arrangements." "It is too late for flowers, you idiot," Bianca snapped. Tears of rage were welling in her eyes. "Do you know who is going to be in that ballroom? Everyone. The Vanderbilts, the Rothschilds, the senators. If we are not in that room, we don't exist." Just then, a ripple of energy tore through the restaurant. It started near the entrance and spread outward like a shockwave. A waiter whispered to a busboy. A busboy whispered to a patron. A patron gasped and pulled out their phone. The rumor had arrived. "Oh my God," a woman at the table next to us said, her voice trembling. "Have you seen the news? The flight logs were just leaked." "What logs?" her companion asked. "The diplomatic flight logs. It is confirmed. The Duke of Avalonia is in the country, and he is coming here." To Silver Point, the name Avalonia hit the room like a bomb. It was a small, fiercely independent European principality, known for 2 things: immense, secretive wealth and a royal family that almost never gave public appearances. The Duke was a figure of myth, a man who controlled more private banking assets than most G7 nations. Bianca's face went drained of color, then flushed a deep, violent red. "The Duke?" she whispered. "The Duke is coming to the gala?" "That is the rumor," Preston said, scrolling frantically through a news feed. "Twitter is blowing up. They say his security detail was spotted on the highway heading this way. Holy smoke. If the Duke is here, this isn't just a party. This is a global summit." The stakes had just multiplied by a factor of 1,000. It was no longer just about social climbing. It was about proximity to historical power. To be in the same room as the Duke of Avalonia was something you could trade on for a decade. To be stuck on the patio while the Duke dined inside was a humiliation that would never be forgotten. "I need a table," Bianca said, her voice shaking. She looked around the restaurant, her eyes wild. She stood up, waving her hand at the passing maitre d'. Henri, come here." The maitre d', a man with the patience of a saint and the eyes of a shark, glided over. "Yes, Mrs. Harrow?" "I need to upgrade my ticket," Bianca said, breathless. "I don't care what it costs. I need a table in the grand ballroom, a table for 4, no, even a table for 2. Just get us in." "I am afraid the ballroom is strictly capacity controlled. Mrs. Harrow," Henri said smoothly. Especially with the expected VIPs. Security protocols are absolute. $50,000, Bianca blurted out. The restaurant went quiet for a beat. My father choked on his water. Bianca, he hissed. I am serious, Bianca said, her voice rising. She pulled a checkbook out of her purse. I will write a check right now. $50,000 for a table. Donate it to the charity. Put it in your pocket. I don't care. Just get me a seat. Henri smiled, a tight, pitying expression that was far more insulting than a sneer. Madame, I have just turned down a bribe of $100,000 from the gentleman at table 4. It is not about money. It is about access. The list is closed. He bowed slightly and walked away, leaving Bianca standing there, checkbook in hand, looking like she had just been slapped. She sank back into her chair, defeated. This is a nightmare, the biggest night of the decade, and I am going to be watching it on a jumbotron with the losers. Maybe we can bribe a waiter to let us sneak in the side door, Preston suggested, his voice low and desperate. Wear a uniform or something. Stop it, Preston, my mother said, looking pale. You are sounding ridiculous. I watched them spiral. I watched the greed and the vanity eating them alive. It was fascinating, in a morbid way, to see how quickly their facade of sophistication crumbled when denied the one thing they wanted. They were not elite. They were just rich people with no access. Actually, I said, breaking my silence. My voice was calm, cutting through the hysteria at the table. The seating chart is not the most important thing. It really matters who is hosting the event. That determines the protocol. Bianca whipped her head around to look at me, her eyes narrowing. She looked like she wanted to throw her wineglass at my face. Oh, please, she spat. What would you know about it? What would you know about protocol? Noel? Does the library have a gala for National Punctuation Day? I am just saying, I continued, unbothered. If the Duke is attending, the host has the discretion to override the committee. The guest list belongs to the presiding officer. And you think you know who the presiding officer is? Bianca laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You think because you read a few biographies you understand how high society works? You live in a fantasy world. Noel, you know about Dewey Decimal numbers. You know about late fees. You do not know about dukes. You are embarrassing yourself. Noel, my mother added, shaking her head, don't try to chime in on things you don't understand just to feel included. It is painful to watch. I took a sip of water. I might be able to help, I said. The table went dead silent. Preston blinked. My father frowned. Bianca just stared at me with her mouth slightly open. Help? Preston repeated. Help how? You going to knit a scarf for the Duke? I can get you into the grand ballroom, I said. If that is what you really want, I can make a call. For a second, nobody moved. Then, the laughter started. It began with Bianca, a high, incredulous giggle that quickly escalated into full-blown hysterics. Then Preston joined in, a deep, belly-shaking guffaw. Even my parents were smiling, shaking their heads as if I had just told a particularly cute joke. Oh, Noel, Bianca gasped, wiping a tear from her eye. Oh, that is rich. That is really rich. You are going to get us into the most exclusive event in the country? Who are you going to call? The Ghostbusters? Noel, stop it, my mother said, her voice sharp with reprimand. Do not tell lies to get attention. It is pathological. Why would you say something so absurd? I am offering a solution, I said, shrugging. You said you wanted a seat. We want a seat, Noel, not a fairy tale. Preston sneered. Unless you are planning to apply for a job as a busboy, that is the only way someone like you gets into that room. Maybe if you scrub the floors well enough, they will let you stand in the corner and hold a tray. She could not even be a busboy, Bianca said, recovering from her laughter but still smirking. She would probably drop the tray. She is too clumsy. Remember how she dropped the punch bowl at my wedding? I didn't drop it. Bianca, you pushed me, I said, though I knew the correction was pointless. Details. Bianca waved her hand. The point is, Noelle, stay in your lane. You fix old books. We handle the real world. Do not offer to help us. It is insulting. It implies you have some kind of power, and we all know the only power you have is over a stack of paperbacks. It is very unbecoming. Noelle, my father said sternly, delusions of grandeur are not attractive. Just eat your free meal and be quiet. Let the adults handle the crisis. I looked at them. I looked at the way they leaned away from me, united in their mockery. They were so sure of their worldview. They were so certain that the hierarchy they perceived was the only one that existed. They measured power by the flash of a credit card and the loudness of a voice. They had no concept of soft power. They had no idea that the woman sitting across from them, the daughter they were ashamed of, was the only person in the room, perhaps the only person in the state, who had the direct private number of the Duke of Avalonia saved in her contact list under Client A. Okay, I said softly. I won't mention it again. Good, Bianca said. Now, Preston, try calling the catering company. Maybe we can bribe the chef. I glanced out the window again. The black Range Rover had stopped at the security checkpoint at the bottom of the hill. The gate was lifting. The Rolls-Royce was gliding through. They were 3 minutes away. My family was busy arguing about which waiter to bribe. They were busy clawing at the doors of a room they couldn't enter, unaware that the person holding the key was sitting right there, offering it to them, and being laughed at for the trouble. It was almost poetic. I am telling you, $50,000 is not enough, Preston was saying, wiping sweat from his forehead. We might have to go to $75,000. I don't care, Bianca cried. Sell the boat. Just get me in that room. I sat back and folded my hands. The show was about to begin. The prologue was over. The actors were on stage, and the director had just arrived. The laughter at the table eventually died down, settling into a simmering stew of amusement and pity. My family wiped tears of mirth from their eyes, their faces flushed with the exertion of mocking the very idea that I, Noelle Harrow, could offer them anything of value. It was a fascinating psychological display. They had constructed a reality where I was the family mascot for failure, and any deviation from that script was treated as a comedy routine. Seriously, though, Noelle, Bianca said, catching her breath and reaching for her compact mirror to check her lipstick. It is cute that you want to help. It really is. But leave the heavy lifting to Preston. He knows how to talk to these people. You would probably start organizing their bookshelves by the Dewey Decimal System and get us banned for life. I should have stopped there. I should have let the silence reclaim the space between us and waited for the inevitable climax of the afternoon. But there is a part of me, perhaps the part that is still the little sister wanting to be taken seriously, that felt the need to clarify. I wanted to give them one last chance to understand the board before I checkmated the king. It is not about books, Bianca, I said, keeping my voice even and devoid of the defensiveness she was fishing for. Aegis Archives is not a library. We are the primary technical and security sponsors for the Autumn Equinox Gala. The artifacts the Duke is bringing, the Royal Charter and the Crown Signet, are being transported in climate-controlled cases that my engineers designed. We are handling the biometric security for the ballroom entrance. I watched the information hit Bianca's brain. I watched her process the words, security, engineers, and technical sponsor, and then I watched her filter it through 20 years of prejudice until it came out the other side completely unrecognizable. Technical sponsor, Bianca repeated slowly, her brow furrowing. Then, her face cleared, lit by the dawn of a completely incorrect realization. Oh, you mean the programs? You are doing the printing. I blinked. I beg your pardon? The printing, Bianca said, gesturing vaguely with her hand as if shooing a fly. You work with paper, archives, old stuff. You guys are printing the event programs and the menus. That makes sense. They probably needed a vendor who could handle that old-fashioned cardstock look. Did you give them a discount? Is that how you got the contract? No, I said, feeling a migraine pulsing behind my left eye. We are not printing menus. We are securing international assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Right, assets, Preston chuckled, tearing off a piece of baguette. Fancy word for flyers? Look, it is nothing to be ashamed of. Noel, every event needs a printer. Someone has to make sure the ink doesn't smudge on the napkins. Good for you. It is a foot in the door. It is not printing, I said, my voice hardening slightly. It is military-grade encryption and physical security. Sure, Bianca said, dismissing my entire career with a sip of her mimosa. Hey, actually, this works out perfectly. If you are printing the programs, you must have access to the proofs. I want you to snag me a copy, but not just a regular one. I want one of the VIP commemorative editions with the gold foil. And if you can manage it without getting fired, try to get one that the Duke has touched, or at least one that has been near him. I want to frame it. You want me to steal a menu for you, I stated flatly. Borrow, Bianca corrected, winking. Call it a perk of the job. Just tuck it under your shirt, or in your cleaning cart, or whatever you use to move the paper around. Consider it rent payment for us buying you lunch today. I looked at them. I looked at the utter conviction in their eyes. To them. The leap from CEO of a global security firm to person who steals menus was not a leap at all. It was the only logical conclusion in their world. I was small, so my job must be small. If I was involved in a big event, it must be in the smallest, most servile capacity possible. I will see what I can do, I said, the lie tasting like iron on my tongue. There was no point. I could have shown them my bank balance, my security clearance badge, or a photo of me shaking hands with the president, and they would have asked me if I had photoshopped it at the library computer lab. That is a good girl, Preston said, patting the table. See, everyone contributes in their own way. I bring the money, Bianca brings the charm, and Noel brings the stationery. The universe, seemingly sensing that the irony meter was not yet maxed out, decided to intervene at that exact moment. A hush fell over the immediate vicinity of our table. Approaching us was not our harried, underpaid waiter, but a man in a pristine tuxedo with a silver tasting cup hanging from a chain around his neck. He was the head sommelier of the Silver Point Club, a man known to be more snobbish than the members themselves. He carried a bottle of red wine as if it were a holy relic, cradling the base with a white cloth. He stopped at our table. The label on the bottle was yellowed parchment, the dust of the cellar still clinging to the glass shoulder. It was a Chateau Margaux, vintage 1953. I knew for a fact that this bottle was listed on the reserve menu for $8,000. Good afternoon, the sommelier said, his voice a rich baritone that commanded attention. My apologies for the interruption. Preston straightened up. Buttoning his suit jacket, he assumed the posture of a man who expected tribute. Yes, what is this? A gesture from the management, the sommelier said, bowing slightly. For the VIP table, we wanted to ensure your experience today was commensurate with your standing. He presented the bottle. Preston's eyes bulged. Bianca gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Oh my God, Bianca whispered. Preston, that is a Margaux, a 53. I saw that on the Wine Spectator Top 100 list. It is worth a fortune. For us? Preston asked, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat and deepened it. I mean, of course, for us, very thoughtful of the management to recognize the Platinum Legacy status so quickly. Indeed, the sommelier said, as he set the bottle down and began the ritual of cutting the foil. His eyes flicked up. He did not look at Preston. He did not look at Bianca. He looked directly at me. It was a look of profound respect, bordering on reverence, a look that said, I know who is paying the bill for the entire clubhouse renovation. I know who authorized the security upgrade that is protecting this building. I gave him a microscopic nod. Proceed. Shall I pour, sir? The sommelier asked Preston, playing his part in the charade perfectly. Please, Preston said, waving a hand. Let it breathe a little. Then pour. Heavy pours. We are celebrating. The sommelier poured the dark, ruby-red liquid into their glasses. The aroma wafted across the table. Notes of truffle, cedar, and dried fruit. It smelled like history. It smelled like power. To the Platinum Legacy, Preston toasted, swirling the $8,000 wine like it was grape juice. To us, Bianca agreed, clinking her glass against his. They drank, they guzzled. Actually, they drank a wine that had aged for over 70 years in a dark cellar in France with the same casual indifference they would apply to a diet soda. It is good, Preston judged, smacking his lips. A little dry for my taste, but you can taste the oak. Yeah, definitely oaky. Good stuff. It tastes expensive, Bianca added, giggling. It tastes like victory. Noelle, Preston offered, gesturing to the bottle. Want a glass? Or is this too rich for your palate? Might be a waste on someone who drinks boxed wine. I am fine with water. Thank you, I said. I have work to do later. Suit yourself, Preston said, reaching for the bottle to refill his own glass immediately. More for the winners. The sommelier bowed and retreated, casting one last glance at me. He knew. I knew. The staff knew. The only people who didn't know were the ones drinking the wine. Then, my pocket vibrated again. This time, the pattern was different. 3 short pulses, 2 long. This was the specific signal for principal incoming. I pulled out the phone. The screen was black, save for a single line of text in gold font. Royal Household. Private line. I have to take this, I said, standing up abruptly. Bianca looked at the phone, though she couldn't see the screen from her angle. She rolled her eyes. Again? Who is calling you on a Sunday afternoon? Is it the collection agency? Did you miss a payment on your student loans? Probably her boss, my mother sighed, shaking her head, yelling at her for taking a long lunch. I told you, Noelle, you need to be more responsible. You cannot just walk away from your desk whenever you feel like it. It is urgent, I said, stepping away from the table. Tell them the check is in the mail, Preston shouted after me, laughing at his own wit. Don't let them garnish your wages. I walked away from their laughter. I walked past the mahogany bar, past the hostess stand where a line of people were begging for tables, and into the quiet sanctuary of the main foyer. I pressed the answer button and held the phone to my ear. My posture shifted instantly. The slump of the disappointed daughter vanished, replaced by the steel spine of the CEO. Harrow, I said, my voice dropping to a command frequency. Director Harrow, a crisp British voice answered. It was Sir Julian, the Duke's private secretary. We are 2 minutes from the drop point. The Duke requests confirmation that the perimeter is secure. He is anxious. He does not want a scene until he is ready. The lobby is clear, I said, scanning the area. I have 2 agents posted by the north entrance disguised as valets. The sommelier has secured the private corridor. The family is occupied. They are currently distracted by a vintage Margot and their own egos. Excellent, Sir Julian said. The Duke is looking forward to seeing you. He has the package. And Noelle? Yes. He is wearing the pin. I smiled. The pin was a small lapel ornament I had given him after we recovered the Constitution. A tiny silver shield. The emblem of Aegis. It was a breach of protocol for a royal to wear corporate insignia, but he had insisted. Copy that, I said. I am ready to receive. See you in 60 seconds, Sir Julian said. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and took a deep breath. Behind me, in the dining room, my family was likely dissecting my financial failures, speculating on how much debt I was in, and joking about my printing business. They were writing the tragedy of Noelle Harrow. They didn't know that the genre was about to switch to a thriller. I checked my reflection in the glass of the front door. The gray suit was sharp. The hair was perfect. I looked like exactly what I was, the woman who stood between history and oblivion. I wonder who it really was. I heard a voice drift from the dining room entrance. It was Bianca, who had apparently followed me part of the way. likely to eavesdrop. She was standing near the coat check, talking to our mother. Probably a landlord, my mother's voice drifted back. Threatening eviction, poor Noelle. We should probably give her some leftovers to take home. She looks so thin. She brings it on herself, Bianca said. She refuses to listen to Preston. She could be successful if she just listened to us. I turned my back on their voices. I watched the driveway. The black Range Rover turned the final corner, its tires crunching on the white gravel. The grille of the car looked like a snarling beast. Behind it, the Rolls-Royce gleamed in the sunlight, a majestic vessel of state power. The flags on the hood snapped in the ocean breeze. The doorman stiffened. The manager of the club came running out, adjusting his tie, panic and excitement warring on his face. The creditors had arrived, and they were coming to collect something. But it wasn't money. It was me. I walked back to the table with the measured stride of someone who had just confirmed the arrival of a head of state. While my family assumed I had just begged a landlord for an extension on rent, the dining room was buzzing with a frantic energy, a hive of wealthy bees all trying to sting the same flower. The rumor of the Duke's arrival had turned the lunch rush into a spectator sport. Necks were craning toward the windows, and phones were being held up like shields. When I sat down, the atmosphere at our table was thick with a cocktail of pity and irritation. The bottle of 1953 Chateau Margaux was nearly empty. Preston had poured the last of it into his own glass, swirling the dark crimson liquid with a look of profound self-satisfaction. "Everything all right, sweetie?" my mother asked, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if asking about a terminal diagnosis. "Did you manage to smooth things over with your boss, or whoever that was?" "It is handled," I said, placing my napkin back on my lap. "There is nothing to worry about." "Well, that is a relief," Bianca sighed, examining her reflection in the back of a spoon. "I would hate for you to be unemployed again. It is so stressful for Mom and Dad. You know, Preston has an opening for a receptionist at his firm. It pays $15 an hour. You should really consider it. At least it is a real office, not a book dungeon." "I will keep that in mind," I said. "Do not be proud, Noelle," my father added, cutting into a piece of cheese. $15 is nothing to sneeze at for someone with your resume gaps." I did not answer. I could not answer, because at that exact moment, the double doors at the far end of the restaurant, the ones usually reserved for staff or emergency exits, swung open with a heavy, authoritative thud. The sound was different from the usual restaurant clamor. It was the sound of an event. The room did not go silent immediately. It rippled into silence, wave by wave, as people turned to look. Walking through the doors was not a waiter with a tray of oysters. It was not a sommelier with a wine list. It was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a period drama about the British aristocracy. He was wearing a formal morning suit with tails, a pristine white waistcoat, and white gloves that looked like they had never touched a speck of dust in their existence. He was tall, silver-haired, and possessed a posture so rigid it made the military look slouchy. Flanking him were two men who were clearly not restaurant staff. They wore dark navy suits that were cut to conceal bulk, specifically the bulk of sidearms and tactical communication gear. They scanned the room not with curiosity, but with the cold, predatory assessment of threat neutralization. This was Alistair Sterling, the royal household's head of protocol. I had met him in Zurich 3 months ago. He was a man who could silence a room just by raising an eyebrow. The trio moved through the restaurant like an icebreaker ship cutting through a frozen sea. The chatter died. The clinking of forks stopped. The air conditioning seemed to hum louder in the sudden vacuum of sound. Bianca gasped. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the sudden spotlight of attention. "Oh my God," she whispered, clutching Preston's arm. "Preston, look, it is the concierge service. They are coming here." "Who?" Preston asked, his mouth full of bread. "The VIP team," Bianca hissed, frantically smoothing her hair. I told you the Platinum Legacy status meant something. They must be coming to welcome us. Look at them. That is not a waiter. That is a butler. A real butler. They are probably bringing a special gift for the new members. You think? Preston swallowed hard. Sitting up straighter, he buttoned his jacket, a reflex of nervous vanity. Yeah, that makes sense. We are the big fish today. Act natural. Babe, act like we expected this. My mother put her hand to her chest. Oh, Bianca, this is so elegant. Everyone is looking at us. They were indeed looking. The entire restaurant had turned its collective gaze toward our table. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the procession moving steadily across the plush carpet. Bianca stood up. She couldn't help herself. The urge to claim this moment, to bask in the envy of the room, was too strong. She stood up and adjusted the neckline of her dress. Putting on her best, benevolent queen smile, she extended a hand, ready to receive the homage she believed she was owed. Good afternoon, Bianca said, her voice projecting slightly so the neighboring tables could hear. We are the Harrows. It is so lovely of you to— Mr. Sterling did not slow down. He did not blink. He did not acknowledge Bianca's existence. He walked past her outstretched hand as if she were a piece of furniture, a decorative plant, or a ghost. The wind of his passing ruffled the hem of her dress. Bianca froze, her hand still hanging in the air, her smile curdling into a rictus of confusion. Preston, who had started to rise halfway, sank back into his chair, his mouth hanging open. Mr. Sterling stopped. He stopped exactly 3 feet from the corner of the table. He stopped in front of me. He turned his body with military precision. He brought his heels together, and then, in front of the silent, stunned audience of the Silver Point Club, he bowed. It was not a nod. It was not a casual dip of the head. It was a formal, deep bow from the waist, executed at a perfect 45-degree angle, the kind of bow reserved for royalty, heads of state, or people who held the keys to the kingdom. He held the bow for exactly 2 seconds. Then he straightened up, his face a mask of professional deference. Ms. Harrow, he said. His voice was a crisp, clipped British accent that carried the weight of centuries of tradition. Please accept my sincerest apologies for the interruption to your luncheon. I remained seated. I did not smile. I looked him in the eye, maintaining the neutral expression I wore during negotiations. Mr. Sterling, I said, you are early. The Duke was anxious to ensure the transfer was completed before the public engagement, Sterling replied. He did not trust the courier service with this particular item. He insisted I deliver it personally into your hands. One of the bodyguards stepped forward. He was holding a box. It was not a jewelry box from a mall kiosk. It was a heavy rectangular case wrapped in deep, royal blue velvet, the specific shade used exclusively by the House of Avalonia. On the lid, embossed in 24-karat gold, was the royal crest, a double-headed falcon clutching a sword and a scroll. The bodyguard placed the box on the table with extreme care, setting it down right next to Preston's plate of half-eaten oyster shells. The contrast was jarring. The pristine, regal object sitting amidst the debris of my family's gluttony. The silence at the table was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. Bianca slowly sat down. Her face was pale, her eyes darting from the box to me, then to Sterling, then back to the box. Her brain was clearly trying to process the visual data and failing. Excuse me, Bianca said, her voice trembling. There must be a mistake. You are speaking to Noel? Mr. Sterling turned his head slowly to look at Bianca. He looked at her with the mild curiosity one might show a buzzing insect. I am speaking to Ms. Harrow. Yes, he said. But she is Noel, Bianca stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is my sister. She works at a library. Is this a delivery? Did she order something? Is it a book? A book, Sterling repeated. The corner of his lip twitched, a microscopic sign of amusement. Hardly. Madam, it is a mistake, Preston blurted out, laughing nervously. Look, buddy, I think you have the wrong table. We are the Platinum members. I am Preston. This is my wife, Bianca. If there is a gift from the management, it is for us. Noelle is just tagging along. She can't afford this kind of service." Sterling's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. "This is not a gift from the management of a golf club." "Sir," Sterling said, his voice cutting like a razor, "this is a diplomatic pouch from the Sovereign Duchy of Avalonia, and I assure you, the royal household does not make mistakes." He turned his back on Preston, dismissing him utterly, and looked back at me. "Ms. Harrow, the Duke requests that you verify the contents immediately. The protocol requires visual confirmation." I reached out. My hand was steady. I felt the gaze of every person in the room on my fingers. I unlatched the heavy gold clasp of the blue velvet box. It opened with a smooth, expensive hiss of air. Inside, resting on a bed of white silk, lay 2 items. The first was a medal. It was a starburst of silver and diamonds, hanging from a blue and gold ribbon. It was the Star of the Order of the Falcon, the highest civilian honor the duchy could bestow. It caught the light of the chandelier and fractured it into 1,000 rainbows. The second item was a letter, folded on thick, cream-colored parchment, sealed with heavy red wax, stamped with the Duke's personal signet ring. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. "Is that real?" "Diamonds," Bianca whispered. "Those are diamonds." I ignored them. I picked up the letter. I broke the wax seal with my thumb, a sound that cracked through the silence like a gunshot. I unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was bold, sweeping, and familiar. I read it quickly. "My dearest Noelle, the ink is barely dry on the treaty, but I could not wait for the ceremony to tell you. We found the second archive. The map you decrypted was correct down to the meter. You have not just saved a document, you have restored my family's history. This star is a poor token of a nation's gratitude, but it comes with my eternal friendship. I am downstairs. The wolves are gathering. I need my architect. Henrik." I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. I ran my thumb over the cold silver of the medal for a brief second, grounding myself in the reality of what it represented. It represented 6 months of sleepless nights, 3 dangerous trips to the black markets of Prague, and a negotiation that had saved a monarchy from a constitutional crisis. I looked up at Sterling. "The contents are intact," I said quietly. "Please convey my thanks to His Grace. He is waiting." "Ms. Harrow," Sterling said. "He has delayed the start of the press reception. He refuses to enter the grand ballroom without his lead advisor." "Advisor?" my father choked out. "Noelle? An advisor? She is a librarian!" Bianca practically shrieked, the cognitive dissonance finally snapping her composure. "She fixes old books. This is a prank. It has to be. Preston, tell them it is a prank. You hired them, didn't you? To embarrass me? Because I didn't get the table?" "I didn't hire anyone," Preston yelled, sweating profusely. "I don't have this kind of money. Do you see those diamonds? That thing is worth more than our house." Sterling stiffened. He looked at Bianca with cold disdain. "Madam, I would suggest you lower your voice. You are in the presence of a Dame Commander of the Avalonian Order. Disrespect will not be tolerated." "Dame Commander?" my mother whispered, her face draining of all color. I stood up. I closed the blue velvet box with a soft snap. I picked it up, tucking it securely under my arm. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice authoritative. "Tell the Duke I will meet him in the cigar room in 10 minutes. I need to make a phone call to my team in Zurich to release the final security codes for the event." "The cigar room," Sterling nodded. "An excellent choice. It is secure. I will have the area cleared of civilians." He glanced at my family one last time, his gaze lingering on the empty wine bottle and the messy plates. "Shall we have the car bring you around to the private entrance, Ms. Harrow?" "No," I said. "I will walk. I think the fresh air will do me good." "Very good. Madam," Sterling bowed again. The 2 bodyguards bowed. It was a scene of surreal deference. Then, they turned and marched out, the crowd parting for them like the Red Sea. I was left standing at the table. I looked down at my family. They looked like they had been hit by a truck. Preston was trembling. My mother was weeping silently, tears of confusion streaming down her face. My father was staring at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. And Bianca? Bianca sat there, small and defeated, the platinum legacy card forgotten on the table, staring at the royal blue box under my arm. "Noelle," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What is in that box?" "Just some old things," I said, my voice cool and detached. "History, Bianca, just history." I checked my watch. "I have to go. The Duke hates to wait." "Wait!" Preston scrambled up, his chair screeching against the floor. "Noelle, wait, the Duke? You really know the Duke? Like personally?" "He is a client. Preston," I said. "Just a client." "But the cigar room," Preston stammered, his eyes wide with greed and panic. That is restricted. Only founding members are allowed in there. Even I can't go in there." "I know," I said. I turned away from them. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't ask for permission. I simply walked away, but I didn't walk toward the exit. I walked toward the heavy oak doors of the private wing, the ones marked strictly private, no admittance. As I walked, I could feel the eyes of the entire room on my back. The whispers started, rising in a crescendo of speculation. Who was she? Who was the woman in the gray suit? Why did the royal guard bow to her? I reached the doors. A security guard I didn't recognize stepped forward to block my path. He saw the gray suit. He saw the librarian. "Ma'am, this area is restricted for—" Then he saw the blue velvet box. He saw the gold falcon crest. He froze. His eyes snapped up to my face. He saw the look in my eyes. The look of someone who owned the building, the ground it stood on, and the secrets buried beneath it. He stepped back. He opened the door for me. "Right this way, ma'am," he murmured. I stepped through the threshold, leaving the noise, the smells, and the petty ambition of the Silver Point dining room behind. The door clicked shut, sealing me into the silence of real power. I had 10 minutes, and I had a lot of work to do. Sterling and his security detail had vanished with the same military precision with which they had arrived, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on the tablecloth. The air in the restaurant was no longer filled with the clinking of silverware or the murmur of gossip. It was filled with the static charge of collective shock. I remained standing for a moment, the blue velvet box tucked securely under my arm. I had intended to leave. I had visualized the walk to the private sector, the closing of the heavy oak doors, the final separation from this table of toxicity. But as I looked down at them, my sister, pale and trembling, my brother-in-law, sweating through his expensive suit, my parents, frozen in a tableau of confusion, I felt a strange, magnetic pull. It was not affection. It was the morbid curiosity of a scientist watching a specimen react to a new stimulus. I slowly lowered myself back into my chair. I reached for my water glass. My hand was steady, the condensation on the crystal cool against my fingertips. Bianca was the first to fracture the silence. Her voice was brittle, high-pitched, and laced with a desperate need to reorganize the world back into a shape she understood. "It is a prank," she said, letting out a laugh that sounded more like a hiccup. She looked around the table, her eyes wide and pleading. "It has to be. Noelle, you hired them, didn't you? You found some out-of-work actors from a community theater. Oh, that is actually really funny. You really had us going for a second. How much did you pay them? Did you use your tax refund?" She looked at me, waiting for the punchline, waiting for me to admit that I was still just Noelle the librarian, and that this was just a pathetic attempt to upstage her big day. "Actors," I repeated softly, taking a sip of water. "That is an interesting theory. Bianca." "It is the only theory that makes sense," Preston chimed in, seizing onto the explanation like a drowning man grabbing a life raft. He wiped his forehead with his napkin, his laugh loud and forced. "I mean, Come on, a butler? A velvet box? It is so theatrical. You probably bought that box on eBay. What did it cost you? $50? Maybe 75 if it came with the fake metal? Noelle, this is not funny, my mother scolded, her eyebrows knitting together in that familiar expression of disappointment. She reached out to touch my arm, her fingers cold. We are trying to have a nice celebration for your sister. Why do you always have to make things about you? And lying about knowing a duke? Do you know how dangerous that is? What if someone hears you and thinks you are delusional? I am not delusional. Mother, I said, setting the glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the tablecloth was soft, but it seemed to echo, and I did not hire actors. Mr. Sterling is the head of protocol for the House of Avalonia. He does not do birthday parties, and he certainly does not do pranks. Then explain it, my father demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. Explain how my daughter, who fixes old books for a living, is receiving diplomatic pouches in the middle of a country club. I told you, I said, my voice calm, leveled, and devoid of the apology they were used to hearing. I do not just fix books. I am a senior advisor to the Duke. We have a professional relationship. A professional relationship? Preston scoffed. Doing what? Dusting his castle? Advising him on asset security and historical preservation, I corrected. Among other things, Preston's eyes darted to the blue box sitting on the table. The gold crest gleamed under the chandelier light. The skepticism on his face was warring with his greed. He was a man who knew the smell of money, and despite his words, he could smell something authentic in that velvet. Let me see it, Preston said, reaching out. Preston, don't, Bianca warned. It is probably just a prop. It is probably filled with candy. But Preston didn't listen. He grabbed the cream-colored parchment letter that I had left on top of the box. His fingers, usually so confident when handling contracts or steering wheels, were clumsy. He rubbed the paper between his thumb and forefinger. I watched his face change. Preston dealt in luxury real estate. He knew materials. He knew the difference between laser-printed cardstock and genuine, hand-pressed vellum. He knew the feel of paper that cost more per sheet than a nice dinner. This is vellum, he whispered. He looked at the wax seal. It wasn't the brittle, plastic-like wax you bought at a craft store. It was deep, red, malleable resin, stamped with a complexity that no rubber stamp could replicate. Read it, I said. Preston swallowed hard. He held the letter up, his hands starting to shake visibly. He began to read aloud, his voice wavering. My dearest Noelle, the Royal House of Avalonia is forever grateful for your rescue of the Winter Constitution. We look forward to presenting you with the Medal of Honor at lunch today. Preston stopped. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and hollow. The Winter Constitution? My father asked, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. What is that? It is the founding document of the duchy, I explained, speaking as if I were discussing the weather. Written in 1742. It was believed to be lost during the Great Fire of 1912. For over a century, historians thought it was ash, but it wasn't. It was stolen. The table was silent. Even the diners at the nearby tables seemed to be leaning in, caught in the gravity of the story. Stolen? Bianca whispered. By a private collector. I continued. He kept it in a humidity-controlled vault in a basement in Prague. My firm, Aegis Archives, tracked the digital footprint of a black market auction. We intercepted the sale, but when we recovered the document, it was in critical condition. Black mold had infiltrated the binding. The ink was fading. If we had waited another week, the history of an entire nation would have been wiped clean. I took another sip of water. I spent 3 weeks in a clean room, working in a hazmat suit, using laser ablation to remove the mold spore by spore. I said. I stabilized the ink. I reconstructed the missing text using spectral imaging. I gave them back their history. That is why the Duke is here. He isn't here for the golf. He is here to get his constitution back. The story hung in the air, immense and undeniable. It was a story of international intrigue, high-tech science, and heroic stakes. It was the kind of story you read about in magazines, not the kind of story you heard from your failure of a sister, and that was exactly why they couldn't believe it. "That is ridiculous," Bianca said, shaking her head violently. "Prague? Black market auctions? You are making this up. You have been watching too many movies. You are a librarian. Noelle, you stamp cards. You do not go to Prague." "I have not stamped a card in 7 years. Bianca," I said. "It is a lie," my mother said, her voice trembling. She looked at the letter in Preston's hand as if it were a poisonous snake. "Preston, tell her it is a fake. Tell her she is lying. Noelle, stop this. It is pathological. You are scaring me." "It feels real." "Alara," Preston whispered, looking at the letter with horror. "The paper, the seal, it feels real." "It cannot be real," Bianca screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "Because if it is real, then what does that make us? What does that make me?" She didn't finish the thought, but we all heard it. If I was a hero, if I was a woman who saved nations and advised dukes, then Bianca's Platinum Legacy membership, her greatest achievement, was nothing more than a piece of plastic. If I was real, then she was the fraud. "You probably bought the paper online," Bianca insisted, tears streaming down her face now. "You probably forged the seal. You have always been good with arts and crafts. That is what this is. A sick, elaborate arts and crafts project to ruin my brunch. Think about it. Preston," my father pleaded, looking at his son-in-law. "Does it make sense? Our Noelle, the girl who couldn't even make the cheerleading squad in high school, the girl who drives a Honda, does it make sense that she is this?" Preston looked at me. He looked at the gray suit that he had mocked an hour ago. He looked at the simple watch on my wrist. He was searching for the crack in the facade, the loose thread that would unravel the lie and restore his world to normal. "It is impossible," Preston muttered. $2 billion in assets, international security, no way. You are barely making rent. Noelle, we offered to pay for your lunch. I accepted your offer because it made you feel powerful," I said gently. "Not because I needed it." "Liar," Bianca hissed. "You are a liar. You are jealous. You are jealous of my house, my husband, my life. You made this whole thing up to humiliate me in front of the club." I looked at them. They were terrified. They were clinging to their version of me with white-knuckled desperation, because if they let go, they would have to face the reality of their own mediocrity. They preferred a lying, pathetic Noelle to a successful, powerful one. "Believe what you want," I said, checking my watch again. "The truth does not require your participation to exist." Preston dropped the letter onto the table as if it had burned him. He looked at his phone, then at me, then back at his phone. I could see the gears turning in his head. The businessman in him was waking up. The part of him that understood risk and leverage was starting to scream that maybe, just maybe, he was on the wrong side of the deal. "Noelle," Preston said, his voice changing, losing its mockery and gaining a tremble of uncertainty. "If this is real, then why didn't you tell us? Why let us think?" "I tried," I said. "I tried for years. You just never listened." I stood up again. This time, I did not sit back down. The gravity had shifted. I was no longer orbiting them. They were just debris in my wake. "I really do have to go," I said. "The Duke gets impatient when he is kept waiting, and he still needs to sign the receipt for the Constitution." I picked up the blue velvet box. I left the letter on the table, lying there like a grenade with the pin pulled. "You can keep the letter," I said to Bianca. "Consider it a souvenir, a little piece of the arts and crafts project." I turned my back on their gaping mouths and their tear-filled eyes. I turned my back on the half-eaten seafood and the empty bottle of wine that I had paid for a dozen times over with the tip I left the sommelier last week. But I knew it wasn't over. I could hear the silence behind me cracking. I could feel Preston reaching for his phone. I knew what he was going to do. He was going to check the one thing he trusted more than his wife, more than his eyes, more than his heart. He was going to check the data. And when he did, the real show would begin. I paused with my hand on the brass handle of the private suite door. It was not a hesitation born of doubt, but rather a reaction to the sudden, strangled noise that erupted from behind me. It sounded like a man who had just watched his own life insurance policy expire seconds before a fatal accident. I turned slowly. Preston was holding his phone with both hands, staring at the screen as if it were a portal to hell. The color had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the chandelier. His thumbs were no longer typing. They were frozen, hovering over the glass. "No," Preston whispered. It was a guttural, terrified sound. "No, this is a glitch. This is a fake website." "What is it?" Bianca demanded, her voice shrill with panic. She leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the screen. "What are you looking at? Is it a bad review of the restaurant?" "I searched her name," Preston said, his voice rising to a tremble. "I just typed Noelle Harrow Aegis Archives, just to see, just to prove she was lying about the printing business." He looked up at me. The arrogance was gone. The condescension was gone. In their place was the raw, naked fear of a man realizing he has been poking a sleeping dragon with a toothpick. "There are thousands of results," Preston stammered. "Not just a website, news, global news." He began to read, his voice shaking so hard the words vibrated in the air. The Wall Street Journal, The Silent Guardian, How Noelle Harrow's Aegis Archives Became the World's Most Valuable Data Fortress. Dated 3 months ago, he swiped the screen, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Art Forum, Restoring the Renaissance, a conversation with CEO Noelle Harrow on the ethics of digital immortality. There is a picture. It is you. It is you standing in the Louvre. "Keep going," I said softly. "Bloomberg," Preston choked out. Headline, "The Woman Who Holds the Keys to World History." Subheading, "Aegis Archives Secures Exclusive Contracts with the G7 Nations for Cybersecurity and Heritage Preservation." He swiped again. He looked like he was going to be sick. "There is a photo of you shaking hands with the President of France," Bianca whispered. Reading over his shoulder, her hands flew to her mouth. "And is that the Prime Minister of Japan? Why are you wearing a gala dress? Why do you look like that?" In the photo, I knew I looked nothing like the librarian they knew. In that photo, taken at the G20 summit, I was wearing a bespoke gown. My hair was styled by a professional team. And I was standing center stage, the only woman in a line of world leaders. "And here," Preston said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "Forbes, the Billionaire Index." He stopped. He looked at me, then back at the phone, then back at me. He looked at the gray suit I was wearing, the suit he had mocked as cheap. He looked at the watch he had dismissed as simple. He finally saw them for what they were, the camouflage of a predator who has no need to roar. "Valuation," Preston read, the words sticking in his throat. "Aegis Archives, estimated private valuation $2 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. "2 billion?" Bianca repeated. The word meant nothing to her. It was too big. It was an abstract concept, like the distance to the sun. "That is with a B?" $2 billion, Preston said, looking at me with eyes that were suddenly wide and wet. "You own this? This company? You are the CEO?" "I am the founder and the CEO," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "But the stock," Preston stammered, his mind trying to find a way to minimize the damage, to find a loophole where he could still be the rich one. "It is probably diluted, right? You have investors? You have a board? You probably only own a small percentage, 5%, 10%? I took a step back toward the table. I wanted them to see my face clearly. I wanted them to see the truth without any filters. Aegis Archives is a closed corporation. Preston, I said. I do not answer to a board. I do not have investors. I do not have shareholders. I paused, letting the data load into their brains. I own 100% of the equity, I said. Every chair, every server, every patent, and every contract. It is all mine. Bianca swayed. She actually swayed on her feet, grabbing the edge of the table to steady herself. Her face was gray. I could see the math happening in her head. She was calculating the value of her husband's commercial real estate firm, maybe $5 million on a good day, heavily leveraged with debt. She was thinking about her Platinum Legacy membership, which cost $50,000. She was thinking about the lease on her Mercedes, and then she was placing those numbers on a scale next to $2 billion. It wasn't just a difference in wealth, it was a difference in species. She was an ant bragging about a crumb to a creature that owned the entire bakery. $2 billion, my father whispered. He was staring at his hands. The hands that had thrown away my magazines. The hands that had patted me on the head and told me to find a rich husband. My daughter, $2 billion. Why? Bianca cried out, a sound of pure anguish. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us treat you like that? Why did you let me buy you lunch? Because you never asked. Bianca, I said. You never asked me who I was. You only told me who you wanted me to be. The reaction was rippling outward now. The diners at the surrounding tables had their phones out. They were not looking at the flight logs anymore. They were looking at Google. They were looking at me. That is her, I heard a woman whisper at table 5. I knew she looked familiar. That is the woman from the Time magazine cover last month. The Person of the Year shortlist. The Data Queen, a man whispered back. I read about her in Wired. She is the one who decrypted the lost Bitcoin wallets for the FBI. She is here, someone else said. At Silver Point. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The disdain, the curiosity, the amusement, it all evaporated, replaced by a heavy, reverent awe. I was no longer the odd woman in the gray suit crashing a family brunch. I was the center of gravity. Bianca looked around. She saw the eyes of the room, but they weren't looking at her platinum card. They weren't looking at her dress. They were looking past her, through her, as if she were made of glass. She realized then, with a crushing finality, that she was nobody. In the presence of $2 billion in international diplomatic status, a country club membership was just a piece of plastic. Then, the final blow arrived. The doors to the main office opened, and a man walked out. He was older, distinguished, wearing a suit that cost more than Preston's car. This was Arthur Vance, the president of the Silver Point Club. He was a man Preston had been trying to get a meeting with for 3 years. Preston had sent gifts, made calls, and practically begged for 5 minutes of his time. Mr. Vance walked straight through the dining room. He walked with a purpose. Preston straightened up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe Mr. Vance was coming to kick me out. Maybe he was coming to restore order. Mr. Vance, Preston called out, his voice cracking. Preston Harrow. We met at the Mr. Vance did not even turn his head. He walked past Preston as if he were a potted plant. He walked past Bianca, who was still gripping the table. He walked straight to me. Ms. Harrow, Mr. Vance said, extending his hand. His voice was warm, respectful, and loud enough for the entire room to hear. I was just informed by my security team that you were on the premises. I wanted to come out personally to welcome you. I shook his hand. Thank you, Mr. Vance. I apologize for the commotion. I was just meeting a client. The Duke. Mr. Vance nodded, his eyes shining. Yes, a tremendous honor for Silver Point that you chose our facility for such a sensitive meeting. We are at your complete disposal. If you need the conference suite, the library, the helipad, it is yours. The cigar room should suffice, I said. Of course. Mr. Vance said. He turned then, finally, to look at the table where my family sat amidst the wreckage of their ego. He looked at Bianca, who was staring at him with open-mouthed shock. He looked at Preston, who was trembling. "And this is your family?" "Mr.?" Vance asked. His tone changed. It wasn't rude, but it was dismissive. It was the tone one uses for the entourage, the hangers-on, the background characters. "Yes," I said. "My parents and my sister." "I see." "Mr." Vance said. He signaled to the waiter. "Henri, bring the check for table 4. "We already paid," Preston squeaked. "Void it." "Mr." Vance ordered, waving his hand. "Refund the card immediately." He turned back to Bianca with a tight, polite smile. "Mrs. Harrow, was it?" he asked, not bothering to remember her married name. "Please, allow Silver Point to cover your meal today," Bianca blinked. "Because of my membership? Because I am Platinum Legacy?" "Mr." Vance looked at her, confused for a split second. Then he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No, madam," he said gently. "Because you are Ms. Harrow's sister. We would not dream of charging the family of our most distinguished guest." Bianca made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. It was the ultimate humiliation. She wasn't getting the VIP treatment because of her status, her money, or her years of climbing the social ladder. She was getting a free lunch because she was the charity case of the sister she had mocked for a decade. Her platinum status was irrelevant. Her husband's influence was non-existent. In the eyes of the Silver Point Club, she was just Noelle's sister. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I said. "That is very kind. It is the least we can do," Mr. Vance said. "Now, if you will follow me. The Duke has just requested a specific brandy, and I believe only you know which vintage he prefers." "I do," I said. I looked at my family one last time. Preston was staring at his phone screen, which had locked on the headline, $2 billion. My mother was weeping, her face buried in her hands, realizing that she had spent 30 years betting on the wrong horse, and Bianca was staring at the Platinum Legacy card on the table. She reached out and touched it. It looked small. It looked cheap. It looked like a toy she had outgrown in a single afternoon. "Enjoy the lunch," I said. "I hear the lobster is excellent." I turned and walked away, flanked by the president of the club, moving toward the private sanctuary where the real power resided. I didn't need to look back to know that I had left a crater behind me. The librarian was gone, and she had taken their entire world with her. Mr. Vance walked a few paces ahead, sensing with the instinct of a man who managed the egos of the ultra-wealthy that a private demolition was taking place at table 4. He stopped near the mahogany pillar at the entrance to the private corridor, turning his back to give us a semblance of privacy, though the damage was already public and catastrophic. I stood there, my hand resting on the back of the chair I had vacated, looking down at the 3 people who had defined the geography of my self-worth for 30 years. The silence that settled over the table was not the stunned silence of the previous few minutes. That had been the silence of shock. This was different. This was the silence of a funeral. It was the heavy, suffocating air of a room where something vital had just died. In this case, it was their version of reality. My mother, Ilara, was the first to break. She did not scream. She did not yell. She simply let out a small, broken sound, like a bird hitting a window pane. Tears began to track through the heavy layer of foundation on her cheeks, cutting jagged lines through the makeup. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling, not with joy for my success, but with a profound, terrifying confusion. "Noelle, why? Why didn't you ever tell us? How could you keep something like this life a secret from your own mother?" She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for an absolving explanation. She wanted me to say it was a recent development, a lottery win, something accidental. She wanted an excuse for her own ignorance. I felt a tightness in my throat, the old ache of the child who just wanted to be seen, but I pushed it down. I replaced it with the cold, hard data of memory. "I did tell you, Mother," I said. My voice was low, but in the quiet of our table, it carried like a bell. "I told you over and over again. You just never heard me." That is not true, she sobbed, shaking her head. We would have known. We would have celebrated you. Would you? I asked. Do you remember Christmas, 5 years ago? I had just landed the contract for the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was the first time the Egyptian government had allowed a foreign firm to map the internal chambers using muon radiography. It was the biggest contract in my field. I was 26. I watched the memory flicker in her eyes, struggling to surface through the fog of her indifference. I came home, I continued, relentless. I was so excited I could barely breathe. I started to tell you about the scanning technology, about how I was going to be leading a team of 50 engineers in the desert, and do you remember what you said? My mother stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She didn't remember. Of course she didn't. You interrupted me, I said. You put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Oh, Noelle, all that dust and sand sounds terrible for your skin. Aunt Martha says the law firm downtown is looking for a legal secretary. It is indoors, air-conditioned, and you might meet a nice lawyer. You told me to quit the job of a lifetime to answer phones because you thought I looked tired." My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. I just wanted you to be comfortable. I wanted you to be safe. You wanted me to be small, I corrected. You wanted me to fit into the box you had built for me. I turned to my father. He was sitting slumped in his chair, staring at the tablecloth. The bluster, the head of the household arrogance, was gone. He looked old. He looked shrunken. "And you, Dad?" I said. He didn't look up. 3 years ago, I said. Forbes magazine, the 30 under 30 issue. I was the cover feature for the technology section. Not a mention in the back pages. The cover. I mailed a copy to the house. I wrote a note on it. To Dad. Thanks for pushing me. My father's hand twitched on the table. I came over for Sunday dinner a week later, I said, the memory burning as bright and hot as the day it happened. I looked for the magazine. I wanted to see if you had framed it, or at least put it on the coffee table. I leaned in closer. Do you remember where I found it? My father closed his eyes. A single tear squeezed out from the corner of his eyelid. I found it in the kitchen, I whispered. You were using it as a trivet for the chili pot. You had put a scorching hot pot of chili right on my face. When I asked you about it, you said, "Oh, was that you?" I thought it was just one of those industry catalogs they send out. I didn't look at it. You didn't even open it. Dad, you used my success to protect your table from a burn mark. I didn't know, my father croaked, his voice cracking. I didn't look. I just saw paper. I just saw paper. Exactly, I said. You saw paper. You never saw me. The cruelty of the truth hung in the air. These weren't accusations. They were facts. They were the accumulated evidence of a lifetime of neglect. They had been so busy polishing the trophy, that was Bianca, that they hadn't noticed the gold mine sitting in the corner. Bianca let out a sharp, ragged breath. She wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. However, unlike our mother's tears of regret, Bianca's were hot with humiliation. She was crying because she had lost the game she didn't even know she was playing. So that is it? Bianca snapped, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of shame and fury. You sat here for 2 hours. You sat here and let me brag about this stupid card. You let Preston talk about his wait list. You let us buy you lunch. You were just sitting there laughing at us, weren't you? She looked up at me, her eyes burning with hatred. You enjoyed it, you sick, twisted little. You enjoyed watching me make a fool of myself. You wanted to wait until the perfect moment to pull out your diamonds and your duke and crush me. This was a setup. I looked at my sister. I saw the fear behind the anger. She was terrified that her entire identity, the successful, pretty, superior sister, was a lie. It wasn't a setup, Bianca, I said, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I came here today because it is Sunday, and we always have brunch on Sunday. I came here hoping, just for once, that we could have a meal where we talked about something real. I wanted to tell you about the Avalonia project. I really did. I gestured to the empty wine bottle and the piles of seafood shells. But you didn't ask, I said. From the moment we sat down, it was the Bianca show. It was the membership card show. You didn't ask me a single question about my life that wasn't an insult. You didn't give me a chance to speak. You filled every second of silence with your own reflection. I was happy, Bianca cried. I was happy about something. Why couldn't you just let me be happy? I did, I said. I sat here and drank water while you drank $800 worth of champagne. I let you have your moment, but then you tried to erase me. You and Preston tried to turn me into a charity case to make yourselves feel taller. I didn't crush you, Bianca. You crushed yourself against the reality of who I am. Preston cleared his throat. It was a wet, nervous sound. He had been quiet during the emotional exchange, his eyes darting back and forth between his phone and me. The shock was wearing off, and the survival instinct of the salesman was kicking in. He sat up, adjusting his tie, trying to assemble the shredded remains of his dignity into something resembling a business face. Okay, Preston said. Okay, look, emotions are running high. I get it. We messed up. We underestimated you, Noel. I admit that. I am man enough to admit when I am wrong. He forced a smile. It was a gruesome sight, stretching tight over his panic. But let's look at the big picture here, Preston continued, his voice taking on that oily, persuasive cadence he used on prospective clients. We are family. Harrows stick together, right? And this Aegis company, $2 billion. That is a lot of liquidity. That is a massive portfolio. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Now, I know you are a genius with old paper and computers, Preston said. But finance? Wealth management? That is a different beast. You need someone you can trust to handle that kind of volume. You don't want strangers managing your money. Noel, they will fleece you. You need family. I watched him with a kind of detached fascination. He was truly shameless. 10 minutes ago, he was offering to pay for my lunch as charity. Now, he was auditioning to be my CFO. I have some opportunities right now, Preston said, gaining speed. Commercial zones in the meatpacking district. High risk, but for someone with your capital, we could double your investment in 6 months. I could set up a family office. You, me, and Dad. We could run the Harrow Empire. What do you say? We put this water under the bridge, and we start making real money together. My father looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that there was a way to salvage this, to attach himself to the rocket ship he had ignored for 30 years. Preston, I said. My voice was ice. He stopped, his smile faltering. Do you know what a blind trust is? I asked. Well, sure. I know the concept, Preston stammered. But those are for politicians. You don't need that. You need control. My assets are managed by a consortium of Swiss and Singaporean banking firms, I said. They are held in a blind trust structure due to the sensitive nature of my government contracts. Because I handle classified intelligence for the G7, my financial entanglements are vetted by the NSA and Interpol. Preston's face went slack. To become an investment partner with me, I continued, enjoying the way the color drained from his face, you would need to pass a level 5 security clearance. They would audit every tax return you have ever filed. They would investigate every friendly handshake deal you have ever made. They would look at every corner you have cut, every bribe you have paid to a zoning official, and every creative accounting trick you have used in your real estate business. I leaned down, placing my hands on the table. So, tell me, Preston, I whispered, do you want me to call the auditors? Do you want the federal government to look at your books to see if you are qualified to handle my money? Preston went white. He looked like he was about to vomit. He shook his head rapidly, unable to speak. He knew, and I knew, that his business was a house of cards built on shortcuts and gray areas. An audit would send him to federal prison. I know, Preston squeaked. No, that won't be necessary. I didn't think so, I said. My money is out of your reach. Preston, It always will be. You don't have the clearance. You don't have the ethics. And frankly, you don't have the talent. I stood up straight, brushing an invisible speck of dust from my gray suit. My father let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Preston, the son he had chosen, the man he had praised as a titan of industry. He saw a sweating, terrified fraud. Then he looked at me. He saw the titan he had thrown away. "I was wrong," my father whispered. It was barely audible. "I bet on the wrong one." "Yes, Dad," I said softly. "You did." I looked at them one last time. The picture was complete. The successful sister was a fraud. The powerful husband was a criminal in waiting. The wise parents were fools. And the failure was the only thing in the room that was real. "Goodbye," I said. "Noelle, wait," Bianca sobbed, reaching out a hand. "Please, don't leave us here. Everyone is staring. Please." "They are not staring at you, Bianca," I said. "They are staring at the empty space where I used to be." I turned and walked toward Mr. Vance, who was waiting respectfully by the door. The heavy silence of the table followed me. A ghost that I had finally exorcised. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt light. The weight of their expectations, the weight of their disappointment, the weight of their blindness. It was all gone. I had left it on the table next to the oyster shells. "Mr. Vance opened the door for me. "Ready, Miss Harrow?" "Yes," I said. "I am ready," as the door closed. Cutting off the view of the dining room, I heard the faint sound of a glass shattering. I didn't know if it was Preston dropping his drink or Bianca throwing hers. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. The heavy oak door had not yet fully latched behind me when the world outside exploded into a symphony of controlled chaos. It started with a low thrumming vibration that rattled the crystal wine glasses on the empty tables. A sound felt in the chest before it was heard by the ears. Then came the sirens, a piercing wail that cut through the coastal breeze, followed immediately by the distinctive rhythmic chopping of rotor blades slicing through the air. "Mr. Vance froze, his hand hovering over the door handle. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of professional panic and adrenaline. "The Eagle is early," I said, checking my watch. It was 1:18 in the afternoon. He always hated traffic. The sound grew deafening. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the dining room, a shadow swept over the manicured green of the 18th hole. A massive, twin-engine Sikorsky helicopter, painted in a deep, glossy midnight blue with the Avalonian crest emblazoned in gold on the tail, began its descent directly onto the fairway. The downdraft whipped the flags on the putting green into a frenzy and sent whitecaps racing across the decorative ponds. The dining room of the Azure Coast, which had just begun to recover from the revelation of my net worth, was plunged back into absolute hysteria. But this was not the hysteria of gossip. It was the hysteria of witnessing history. Chairs scraped against the floor as every single patron stood up. They did not stand out of respect, at least not initially. They stood because the sheer magnitude of the arrival demanded it. "Security protocols," Mr. Vance muttered, tapping his earpiece. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves their tables." I turned back toward the room. I had intended to leave my family in the wreckage of their own making, but protocol dictated that when the sovereign arrived, the senior advisor stood her ground. I took 2 steps back into the main dining area, standing just a few feet away from the table where Bianca, Preston, and my parents were still frozen in their tableau of shock. The glass doors to the terrace burst open. 6 men in dark tactical suits entered with the precision of a metronome. They did not shout. They did not run. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency, fanning out to secure the exits and the kitchen access. One of them, a man I recognized as the Duke's personal detail leader, scanned the room, his eyes locked onto mine. He gave a sharp nod. Then, the helicopter engines began to wind down, the whine dropping to a low hum. The side door of the aircraft opened. A red carpet was not rolled out. He did not need one. The grass was sufficient. The Duke of Avalonia stepped onto the soil of the Silver Point Club. He was a man who carried the weight of 600 years of lineage on his shoulders. Yet he moved with the lightness of a man who had never carried a grocery bag. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a bespoke navy suit that fit him like a second skin. He did not look like a celebrity. Celebrities begged for attention. He looked like a monarch. He commanded attention simply by existing. As he walked through the terrace doors and into the restaurant, the silence was absolute. It was a reverent, heavy silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. He was flanked by Mr. Sterling and 2 more guards, but they faded into the background. The Duke's presence filled the room. He had eyes the color of the North Sea, cold, intelligent, and piercing. He scanned the sea of faces, the wealthy Americans who thought they were the kings of their little hills, and he dismissed them all with a single glance, except for one table. He began to walk. He walked straight down the center aisle, his shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. He was heading directly toward table 4. I watched Bianca. It was a tragic, fascinating thing to witness. Despite everything, despite the blue velvet box, despite the Google search, despite the humiliation, hope was a weed that refused to die in her heart. She saw the Duke walking toward us, and her spine straightened. She licked her lips. Her hand flew to her necklace. I could see the delusion reforming in her eyes. Maybe he knows me. Maybe he knows Preston. Maybe this is about the membership. She stood up. She couldn't help herself. She stood up and took a half step forward, a trembling smile plastered on her face, ready to curtsy, ready to be acknowledged, ready to be saved from the reality of her irrelevance. "Your Grace," Bianca breathed, the words barely a whisper. The Duke did not break stride. He looked at Bianca, but he did not see her. To him, she was an obstacle, a piece of scenery to be navigated around. He stepped smoothly to the side, bypassing her outstretched hand with a grace that was more insulting than a slap. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. The room held its breath. "Noelle," he said. His voice was a rich baritone, warm and resonant. The kind of voice that made you want to agree with whatever it said. "Your Grace," I replied, dipping my head in a respectful nod. The standard greeting for a civilian advisor. But Henrik, the Duke of Avalonia, was not in the mood for standard greetings. He laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that broke the tension in the room like a hammer hitting glass, and stepped forward. He threw his arms open. "Protocol be damned," he boomed. And then, in front of 300 stunned witnesses, the Duke of Avalonia hugged me. It was not a polite, air-kiss social hug. It was a bear hug. It was the embrace of a man who had thought he had lost his family's legacy and had it returned to him by a miracle. He held me by the shoulders, pulling me in close, his hands gripping my arms with palpable gratitude. "You did it," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear the emotion in it. "You actually did it. Sterling told me the ink is stable. He told me it is perfect." "It is stable, sir," I said, smiling as I pulled back gently. "But please, you are wrinkling the suit. I do not have a valet to press it for me." He laughed again, stepping back and looking me up and down. "A tragedy. We must get you a staff. A dame commander cannot be expected to iron her own laundry." The atmosphere in the room had shifted from awe to shock. The patrons were no longer just watching a royal. They were watching a royal defer to the woman they had ignored for years. I saw the way they looked at me now. The gray suit was no longer drab. It was understated power. My lack of jewelry was no longer poor. It was confidence. The Duke kept his hands on my shoulders for a moment longer, then turned his attention to the people standing behind me. He looked at Preston, who was trembling so violently his knees were knocking together. He looked at my mother, who was clutching her napkin to her mouth to stifle a sob. He looked at my father, who was staring at the floor as if he wished it would open up and swallow him. And he looked at Bianca. She was standing there, rejected, ignored, and small. Her platinum legacy world, had crumbled into dust. "And this," the Duke said, his voice cooling slightly, returning to the polite detachment of the aristocracy, "this must be the family." He looked at them with a mild, anthropological curiosity, as if he were observing a species of lemur he had read about but never encountered. "Yes, Your Grace," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "This is my parents, Arthur and Alara, my sister, Bianca, and her husband, Preston." "I see," the Duke said. He did not offer his hand. He did not bow. He simply nodded, a microscopic inclination of his head that acknowledged their existence without validating it. They looked quite surprised. "They are not familiar with the scope of my work, sir," I said. "We were just discussing it." "Not familiar?" The Duke raised an eyebrow, a gesture of genuine perplexity. "But you are the most brilliant archivist of your generation. You saved the Vatican codexes. You redesigned the security grid for the Louvre. Surely they know this." "We talk mostly about the weather," I said. The Duke looked at my father. He looked at the man who had used my Forbes cover as a trivet. He seemed to understand everything in a single second. The intelligence that made him a formidable statesman saw through the cheap suits and the desperate vanity of the Harrow family. "A pity," the Duke said softly. "It is a rare thing to have a national treasure sitting at your dinner table and mistake it for a coaster." My father flinched. The insult was so elegant, so refined, and so devastatingly accurate that it drew blood without leaving a mark. "We are very proud of her," Preston stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Very proud. Always knew she was special." The Duke turned his gaze to Preston. It was like a laser beam hitting an ice cube. "Indeed," the Duke said. "I am sure you are." He turned his back on them. He did not say goodbye. He simply erased them from his universe. He turned back to me, his face lighting up again with warmth. "Come, Noel," he said, offering me his arm, a gesture that made the women at the nearby tables audibly gasp. "The committee is waiting in the grand ballroom. I have refused to start the ceremony until you are by my side. I have the medal, but I need the hero." I looked at his arm. It was covered in the finest wool money could buy. I looked at the room. Every face was turned toward us. The waiters, the guests, the manager. They were all witnesses to the ascension. I reached out and took his arm. "I am ready, Your Grace," I said. "Good," he said. "And after the ceremony, we must discuss the new contract. The King of Spain called me yesterday. He has a problem with a Goya painting and a moisture leak. I told him there is only one woman in the world I trust to handle it. I charge double for Spanish monarchs," I joked. "The paperwork is a nightmare." "Charge him triple," the Duke whispered, leaning in as we began to walk. "He can afford it." We began to move toward the double doors of the grand ballroom. The crowd parted for us. People bowed, actual, physical bows, not for him, but for us, as we walked away. I felt a hand brush against my free arm. It was a desperate, clawing touch. "Noel," Bianca whispered. Her voice was a wreckage of tears and envy. "Noel, please." I stopped. The Duke stopped with me. Looking down at the interruption with mild annoyance, I turned my head. Bianca was reaching out, her fingers trembling in the air. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking for love. She was asking for proximity. She wanted to be swept up in the wake of the comet. "Can I?" she choked out. "Can we just watch? From the back? Just to see you get the medal?" I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had spent 30 years making me feel small so she could feel big. I looked at the woman who had mocked my gray suit and my book glue. I looked at the Duke. He raised an eyebrow, leaving the decision entirely to me. I looked back at Bianca. "The grand ballroom is at capacity." "Bianca," I said softly. "You said it yourself. Only the elite are allowed inside. But you are the guest of honor," she pleaded. "You can get us in. You said you could help." "I did offer," I said, "an hour ago, but you told me I should apply for a job as a busboy." I gently disengaged my arm from the space near her hand. The patio has excellent screens, I said. You will be able to see everything from there. The resolution is quite high. Noelle, she wept. We are family. Yes, I said. We are. I turned back to the Duke. Shall we, sir? We shall, he said. We walked through the double doors. The heavy wood swung shut behind us, sealing out the sound of Bianca's sobbing, sealing out the smell of the seafood buffet, sealing out the mediocrity of the life I had left behind. Ahead of me, the grand ballroom waited. The chandeliers were blazing, the cameras were flashing. The world was waiting for Noelle Harrow, and for the first time in my life, I was not just attending the party, I was the party. I turned forward, facing the light, facing the Duke, and facing the life I had earned. The music swelled, the crowd turned, and for the first time, I didn't just walk into the room, I owned it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this tale of revenge and revelation, please comment down below where you are tuning in from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Noelle's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Sunday Drama Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.